The sun had barely climbed over the hills when Sheriff Colton Reeves pulled his dusty Ford Ranger into the yard of the Willow County courthouse. It was one of those quiet American towns where the air always smelled of pine and rust, where everyone knew everyone, and everyone carried their secrets like loaded guns. Reeves was a man worn by war, and by years of trying to keep order in a place that didn't much care for it. He had seen Afghanistan, seen men fall apart in the dust, and came home to find the same kind of rot eating through his town. Not bullets and bombs, but silence, power, and fear. That morning, there was already a crowd outside the courthouse. A man named Earl Thatcher had been brought in, a ranch owner, rich, arrogant, and cruel. He had been accused of running a private auction on his land, where desperate immigrants and trafficked women were forced into servitude. Reeves had heard whispers for years, but never proof. Today, he had proof. A battered pickup truck had pulled into the station before dawn, driven by a woman barely 20. Her clothes were torn, her face bruised, and in the backseat, two little girls clung to each other, wide-eyed and silent. Reeves had seen their kind of fear before, the kind that never fades, even when the danger's gone. Her name was Mara. When Reeves found her standing in his station, shaking, clutching those girls like they were the last pieces of her soul, he didn't ask questions. He just got her water, a blanket, and listened. And what she said broke something inside him. She told him how she'd been taken months ago from the outskirts of Houston, promised a cleaning job, then forced to work on Earl Thatcher's ranch along with other women. The girls weren't hers, they were twin daughters of another woman, who died trying to escape. Before dying, that mother had begged Mara to take them and run. Mara did. That's how she ended up here, bloodied, half-starved, but alive. And the twins, they hadn't spoken a single word since. When Thatcher was arrested that morning, his lawyer already waited outside the courthouse. He wore a silk suit and a smirk. "Sheriff," he said, "my client was merely helping some unfortunate women get employment. You know how stories get twisted. Let's not embarrass the county." Reeves looked at the man, then at Thatcher, heavy, grinning, smelling of whiskey. And for the first time in a long time, Reeves felt rage burn through his calm. That's when Thatcher said it. He laughed, loud enough for the crowd to hear, and turned to Reeves. "Choose any woman you want, Sheriff. You're a lonely man, I can tell. You can have the pick of them. That's how the world works." The words hung in the air like poison. The courthouse went silent. And before Reeves could respond, a small, trembling voice broke through the crowd. It was one of the twins. Her name was Ellie, the quieter one. Her tiny hand clutched her sister's, her eyes fixed on Mara. Her voice cracked, but clear enough for everyone to hear. "Papa, that's her." The sheriff froze. Every eye turned toward him. He looked down at the girls, both staring at him now, tears streaming down their faces. He felt his knees go weak. "Papa." He'd never seen them before this morning. But then Mara's trembling hand went to her mouth. Her eyes widened, realization flooding her. "Sir," she whispered, barely breathing. They mean their father. The man who used to help at the ranch. The one Thatcher killed." Reeves blinked, unable to speak. But the girls, in their frightened, innocent hearts, had seen something in him. Something that reminded them of the man they'd lost. And somehow, in that single moment, the entire town saw too. The sheriff who'd spent years chasing other people's ghosts had suddenly been chosen, not by politics, not by duty, but by two broken children who decided that he was the man they could call Papa. Thatcher's laugh died in his throat. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Reeves straightened, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. "No, Earl," he said quietly. "That's how the world used to work. Not anymore. The trial lasted weeks. Mara testified with trembling hands. Others came forward, women who had been too scared to speak until now. Thatcher's lawyers fought dirty, but the sheriff's evidence, the chains, the secret rooms, the bloodstains, was too strong. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, the town erupted. Some cried. Some just nodded, as if justice was an old friend finally come home. Thatcher stared at Reeves when they took him away. "You think this changes anything?" He spat. Reeves didn't answer. He didn't need to. He walked out into the sunlight, where Mara waited, holding the hands of the twins. The little girls ran to him, laughing for the first time in months, and he knelt down to their level. "Papa," We're safe now, Ellie whispered. Reeves's throat tightened. He hadn't been called Papa since his own daughter died 6 years ago, lost in a car crash while he was overseas. He looked at Mara, who stood there, tears glimmering but proud. You gave them hope, she said softly. That's more than anyone's done for them in a long time. He didn't answer, just put a hand over his heart and nodded. Over the next months, life slowly returned to Willow County. The courthouse stopped being a place of fear. People began to talk about things they'd buried, about corruption, about power. Reeves didn't seek praise. He worked quietly, repairing the broken fences, visiting the local school, checking in on the women who'd been freed. Mara found work at a diner, saving money for nursing school. And the twins, Ellie and Clara, followed the sheriff everywhere. He'd never planned on being anyone's father again. But sometimes, life doesn't ask permission. On Sundays, they'd all drive out to the lake. Reeves taught them how to fish, how to skip stones, how to live without fear. Sometimes, Mara would join them, bringing sandwiches, sitting on the grass while the girls played in the water. They looked like a family. Maybe they were. One evening, months later, Reeves sat on his porch with Mara after the girls had gone to bed. The crickets sang. The stars burned quietly. You ever think about leaving this place? She asked. He smiled faintly. Used to. Now, I think it still needs fixing. She nodded. You fixed more than this town, Sheriff. He looked at her, puzzled. She met his eyes, steady, honest. You fixed me, she whispered. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. Because somewhere deep inside, he knew, she had fixed him too. Years passed. The courthouse plaque now read, Justice for all, in memory of the women who spoke. Mara graduated as a nurse. The twins grew into strong, fearless young women, never afraid to speak up for others. And Sheriff Reeves, the man who once believed the world couldn't change, watched them grow, proud, humbled, and grateful. On his retirement day, the whole town gathered. The mayor gave a speech, but no one remembered it. What they remembered was when Ellie, now 20, walked up to the microphone and said, People say heroes wear badges or uniforms. But our hero wore kindness. He didn't just save us. He showed us what it means to be a father. To believe again. She turned to him, tears shining. Papa, that's you. The crowd stood. Even the toughest men cried. And in that moment, surrounded by love, redemption, and the soft wind of a town finally at peace, Sheriff Colton Reeves realized that sometimes, the hardest battles aren't fought with guns or laws. They're fought with compassion. And won by choosing to protect, even when you've already lost. The morning sun rose lazily over Willow County, spilling light across dusty streets and pine-dappled hills. Sheriff Colton Reeves parked his Ford Ranger in the courthouse yard, its engine sighing as if tired from decades of chasing criminals. Willow County was a town where people remembered everything, every slight, every kindness, every betrayal, and secrets lingered longer than the pines. Reeves was a man of discipline and quiet anger, shaped by years in the army and overseas deployments. He had witnessed horrors that no one back home could understand, men shattered by fear and loss, families torn apart, lives ended in an instant. Coming home had been another battlefield, one without grenades but full of the slow, creeping rot of injustice. That morning, the courthouse steps were crowded. People whispered nervously as a dusty pickup truck pulled up. In the backseat sat a woman, barely 20, her hands shaking as she held two tiny girls tightly. Their wide eyes reflected fear, distrust, and exhaustion. Reeves had seen that look before, the kind that never fades. The woman's name was Mara. She had been taken months ago under false promises, forced to work on Earl Thatcher's ranch along with other women. The twins clutched each other, silent witnesses to cruelty they could hardly understand. Their mother had died during a desperate escape, leaving them in Mara's care. She had carried them for months, protecting them as best as she could. Thatcher had finally been brought in for questioning. He was a man of wealth and arrogance, his lawyer waiting like a shadow at the courthouse. Thatcher smirked, smelling of whiskey and entitlement. Choose any woman you want, Sheriff, he sneered, his laugh cutting through the tense morning air. You're a lonely man, the pick is yours. That's how the world works. The words hung in the air. The crowd went silent. Then a small voice, trembling, yet clear, pierced the tension. Papa, that's her. Reeves froze. The girl's eyes were locked on Mara. Suddenly, the meaning became clear. Papa was not just a word. It was recognition, a desperate plea, a hope for protection. Mara's eyes widened, her hands trembling at the realization that these innocent children had just identified him as the one they could trust, as the one who would stand against the cruelty they had endured. Thatcher's grin faltered. Reeves felt something ignite inside him, a fire not from anger alone, but from a deeper sense of duty. The years of running from personal grief, the ghosts of war, the quiet loneliness, it all sharpened into focus. He would not let these children down. The investigation that followed was grueling. Mara recounted every detail. The false promises, the secret rooms, the women forced to work in isolation, the bruises, the fear. The twins clung to her side, watching silently but absorbing every word. Reeves coordinated with federal authorities while quietly questioning other survivors. Slowly, evidence piled up. Photographs of the ranch, witness testimonies, financial records, and even traces of DNA linking Thatcher to his crimes. The trial became the center of the town's attention. Witnesses came forward, some for the first time, breaking years of silence. Mara's testimony was courageous, her voice steady despite the memories that clawed at her mind. Each day, Reeves watched her face, saw the pain, and marveled at her strength. The twins watched too, learning that courage sometimes meant speaking truth even when your hands were trembling. Thatcher's lawyers tried to discredit witnesses, twist facts, and intimidate the vulnerable. But Reeves and the survivors pressed forward. Slowly, the truth unfolded, and with it, the town's collective outrage. The day the verdict came, the courtroom was electric. Guilty on all counts, the judge declared. Relief, tears, and muted cheers filled the room. Thatcher's arrogance melted into disbelief and rage, but Reeves didn't flinch. He had faced worse abroad. In the months following the trial, life in Willow County slowly began to heal. Mara found a job at a local diner and began saving for nursing school. She was determined to rebuild her life, piece by piece. The twins, Ellie and Clara, began to laugh again, play outside, and attend school without fear. They called Reeves, Papa, not just in words but in trust and love, bridging the gap of years he had